There are lots of routes to market and they bring challenges as well. The most obvious thing for a retailer is probably to look at their existing operations and say, well, I want to duplicate that overseas. So I might have bricks and mortar stores, I might have an e-commerce operation, or you could look at franchising. I think particularly in retail, it's extremely common to franchise overseas when you don't necessarily franchise in the UK. And that's because often retailers, particularly in the fashion sector, will be approached by various companies in order to take their brand overseas. So that can be good and bad. Good in the sense that franchisees will obviously be using their own money to expand. Bad in the sense that you have a lack of control, or you need to manage the franchisees in order to make sure that they comply with all your brand standards and the way that you want them to operate the business. There's a little bit of a hybrid situation where you could have a license where the franchisees don't necessarily have to operate completely the store as if it was your store, but they do have to stock your products and also make sure that the store looks exactly the same but not necessarily follow all your procedures. Whichever way you choose, clearly that's going to be important to make sure that you have a proper supply chain, how you're going to get the product to the market. If you're doing it through an e-commerce route and with an agile young company, that's possibly the way to go anyway. You can make sure that you can probably sell the products from here, or do you have to set up a depot elsewhere in the world going forward. Other routes are an acquisition. Obviously that's an expensive route. That may not be something you necessarily want to do, but there may be an opportunity to do that. And also have a joint venture partner, a sophisticated partner who perhaps brings something to the table in the way that you can't actually do it yourself, or you don't want to go through the franchise route. Well, there will be a change, and obviously you've got to plan for that change. So, for example, if you're building up an e-commerce operation, you've got to make sure that you have IT infrastructure. You've got to make sure that you don't take your eye off the ball in terms of your own existing business. You've got to make sure that you've got the support in order to support customers. So, for example, that could be through increasing customer service representatives or outsourcing. Things will go wrong, obviously, inevitably, with anything that you choose to do, but it's important to learn from those mistakes as well. According to our recent report, 42% of retailers are actually now looking at acquiring or merging an operation overseas, which is quite an interesting statistic actually. We're also seeing an increase in franchising. I think most retailers now will have that on the boardroom agenda, whether they decide to do it or not, but increasingly it's popular in terms of expansion overseas, even if you don't franchise in the UK. I think the emerging markets are also interesting for retailers. The increase in wealth in the middle class, the attractiveness of looking at sort of Western brands. Made in Britain also has quite a sort of cachet at the moment, which is, I think, attractive. I think the Middle East is also another area where retailers have had quite a strong foothold, and there are very sophisticated brands out there who are operating UK brands on a franchise model, which has worked very successfully.